Can I welcome to the stage Reuben and Rob? We're doing things slightly differently tonight. So this morning some of you won't know Rob, who's about to come onto the stage. He's got a little bit less hair than me and a little bit less hair than Reuben, actually. And we're all I don't know why I was talking about that. Robbie has been our small groups pastor for the last, and student pastor for the last 2 years here since we got up and running off the ground. And he was something what's called our curate, which is like a sort of junior vicar. And we prayed for Rob and commissioned him and a whole team of people that are going with him to another part of Plymouth called Whitley. And they literally had their first service this afternoon. So they kicked off another church there. And Reuben was just ordained at Exeter Cathedral as another sort of vicar in the church. I think we've got a picture of him. We've got a picture of Reuben. There we go. There's Reuben at Exeter Cathedral yesterday. And what we thought we'd do with this tri-church thing happening next week, where we get an opportunity to fling open the doors and invite the city to come and experience something of church and the Christian faith, it begs a bigger question, and that is why church? I mean, what is the point of church? I mean, why are you guys? I mean, there's plenty of things that we could otherwise be doing than sitting in here tonight. This morning, there were people making sandwiches at 8:30 for a small group leaders gathering that we had after the service this morning. Why were they doing that? There were people up even earlier than that getting in here to prepare worship and prepare our kids' groups for them to meet. Why do we do that? And many of you who may have had church experiences over the years will know that church isn't necessarily always the healthiest environment. You know, people can get hurt in churches. We even see stuff in our press of just dreadful things that happen in churches. So what's the point of church? Why do we do this thing? And that's what we're going to unpack a little bit tonight, because actually it has massive implications for your life and my life. In fact, 2,000 years ago, a guy called St. Paul, writing to a church in a place called Ephesus, who may have been wondering the same thing. What are we doing? I mean, they were under immense persecutions, and there were a few rifts and difficulties going on internally in their church. And some of them were probably beginning to wonder, why are we doing this? Why church? And St. Paul says this, Ephesians chapter 3, verse 10. Let's read this out loud together. God's intent was that now, through the church, the manifold wisdom of God should be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly realms. St. Paul sort of says that actually if you really want to get to know what God is like, or more importantly here, that somehow through the church, the spiritual realm gets to see the nature of God in and through the church. Now, I know the church doesn't always necessarily look amazingly powerful or amazingly significant, although that being said, most of the parent and toddler groups in the country, most of the soup kitchens, most of the care home visiting is done by the church, actually, which is an incredibly powerful and beautiful thing. But if you want to see what God is like, look at the church. And actually, the church is meant to be a picture of the nature of God. Your life, my life, and together is meant to be displaying the manifold wisdom of God. You'd only really get to know what purpose in life is like, somehow mysteriously in and through the local church. So we sort of thought together we'd unpack a little bit of what it means to be church and do church and why church. And Paul goes on in the chapter 4 of this letter, we don't have time to read through all of it now, to unpack a little bit more what the church is all about and what that looks like. And really there's 3 headings that come out of that we're going to dial into tonight. And we're going to try and have a bit of a conversation and bat off each other that will hopefully draw you in and inspire you. One thing is to do with calling. The second thing is to do with service, serving one another. And the third thing is to do with growth. I think all of us want to grow, hopefully, as human beings and as individuals in our life. And Paul unpacks a little bit of that and the nature of the church. The first thing he speaks about is calling. He says this, I urge you. Can you say urge? I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. God has a call on each of our lives. And maybe to kick off, Rob, share with us a little bit about calling and maybe God's call on your own life and how you and I might reflect on that and God's calling in each of our own lives too.
Thanks, Olly. I think, so if God's displaying his manifold wisdom, literally his multicoloured wisdom to the heavenly realms, I think what it means is, in this world there are realms, spiritual realms, and it's just a reality. We don't see it all. We see it playing out. But they're everywhere, and I think over Plymouth, everywhere. And they're looking down, and they're looking probably at 3 chumps on the stage and saying, well, that's not the future of a church. Or they're looking at 100 people gathering here and just saying, he can't do anything with them. But God is displaying his wisdom through them to say that's wrong. And it's so encouraging. And actually, if I think back 20 years, what would me and you have been doing? We'd probably be starting a different kind of thing, wouldn't we? It would have nothing to do with the church. But God's displayed his wisdom through people like us, who in one sense, we shouldn't be planting a church. We shouldn't be leading a church. And I think back over my story, and people will know bits of it, and I was addicted to coke, and I was, kicked out of universities, and just on a completely different path. And then he called me through just amazing kindness that wasn't anything that I deserved. And he brought me to a place where he wanted a relationship with me, and then he wanted me to do things for him. And there must have just been demons and evil powers just looking down, just going, wow, I hate what he's managed to do through Rob, but I've got to tip the hat to God. That's impressive. And I think that's what this is getting at. And when I was looking for a church, so I'm a couple of years ahead of Reuben's stage, and I'd done college, I got ordained, and then you start looking for a church to be part of. And just say a little bit of the story. Olly will share you a bit about the story coming here, but I had my own story, and everyone who's come here is sat here for a reason, and sort of God's been orchestrated to get you here, and that's really exciting. And for me, I was looking for a church to do my training at. And it's a difficult thing. You're going to be there for 3 years. You don't want theological college, Vicar factory, or where I was. Spiritually, not a great time, not an easy time sometimes. Can get a bit dry, a bit heavy. And I was looking for something. I want to come flying up the blocks, and I want this to set the path for the rest of my ministry. So I was looking for 3 things. One of them was a church and a vicar and a community of people that believed the Bible. I was looking for a training incumbent that had energy. Be careful what you're praying for. And then I was looking for an edge to the ministry, as in it was either going out to the poor or it was breaking new ground. And I went and looked at, you're supposed to look at one and they want you to say yes to the first one. I turned down 5 curacies because I could tick 2 boxes, but not all 3. And as I was praying to God, he said, no, that's not what I said. I didn't say 2 boxes. Look for the 3. And the pressure mounted on, and my wife was getting more and more pregnant, and all my mates had jobs. We found out that my wife's mum had dementia, and we needed to live near her, and we'd exhausted all the options on the doorstep. I was copied into an email from the bishop that was sent to someone else in the church that I wasn't supposed to be copied into, saying Rob needs to stop messing about and just take a curacy. The one guy had given me advice that was just bang on all the way through my life, said to me, Rob, just stop messing around, take this curacy. I came down and I found a church that I thought ticked all 3 boxes, and then the bishop said to me, you can't go there because it's full of people with addictions, and you used to have addictions and you're not going to be strong enough to handle it. And I thought, this whole thing's falling apart. And then just out of nowhere, really, and this is a big message to people, like, when it just seems like it's darkest, just push on through if the Lord's spoken to you. Because about 2 days later, I get a call from Olly through someone else saying, come over, I want to tell you about a new church that we're doing down in Plymouth, which is a long way from anywhere I wanted to do anything. And it was the worst meeting I've probably ever had in my life, because I went to Olly's house near Wembley, and I sneezed for an hour. I was allergic to his dog. I couldn't believe it. And Olly talks quite a lot. So I was sitting there, listening to him, sneezing, trying to be polite, trying to smile. And then I left that meeting, and despite everything that had happened over the 9 months before, I turned around to Jess, and the Lord just said to both of us, it's here. And do you know what? One thing I've pieced together, so I'm focusing on it, but one thing I've pieced together. Do you know what the vision here is of this church? 1, evangelization of the nations,
Olly?
taking the Bible and God's word to people.
You should make Olly say them.
Go on, Olly. What's the
do
second
you know
one?
the vision, Olly?
The evangelization of the nations, everyone knowing Jesus, the revitalization of the church. People should be excited about Jesus.
Energy.
Yeah. And
transformation.
And the transformation.
An edge to the ministry.
Yeah.
I don't need just piece that together,
Wow.
but the Lord comes through.
Praise the Lord. That's so good. And I think connected with that, like I love those. The lovely thing is, like the Lord wants everyone to have a story a little bit like that. It'll be different to that. But everyone, God has a call on each of our lives. And if any of you have been doing the Christian life for a little bit, hopefully you've got similar-ish crazy stories like Robbie. And if you haven't, the Lord will want to bring those into your life because he has a calling for each of us. And actually the interesting thing about God's call is it is an individual call. But actually, it can only ever be really worked out in community. So even those people and people that Rob respected, even the ones who gave him wrong advice, somehow those were the guys who were still involved in that call as well. And actually, that's where the church, you can only actually really ever work God's call out in the context of the community of the church family together. Reuben, anything you wanted to add on calling at all?
Yeah, just that we overwork it. That's what I've done. I've overworked it over my life. I'm in my 40s now. I probably was called, probably felt I had a call on my life when I was under 10. I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. The call is simple: follow Jesus. That's your call. That's my call. The question is, well, how do I do that? And the question is, well, how will that manifest in my life? What it also means is that if you are a follower of Jesus, even in this moment, that you are following your call. That means that he has equipped you, he has created you, he has gifted you. You are where you should be, seeking to follow Jesus every day in the way that he's called you, in your environment, with your gifts, with your neighbors and your friends and your family. That's your calling. And I didn't get that. So when I was little, I had this sense of calling. Oh, well, maybe part of my calling will be to serve those people in the church and see how I can help. And actually, it took years and years and years, a bit like the Israelites spending 40 years when they could have just done 10 miles. We drift and we wander, but it actually took me to really get my head into, actually, that is a call, that is a dream that God's put in my heart, but it won't be realized until I recognize the calling that he has in this moment. Am I following Jesus in my relationships? Am I following him in my workplace? Have I literally recognized his call on my life there? And until I started to do that, I wasn't able to move on into the next stage.
I love that, and that reminds me actually when I did a job and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't, in a sense, know the personal call of God in my life, and I was in a job that I didn't really think it was going to be a long-term goer kind of thing, but I sensed the Lord sort of saying to me, but Olly, I've got stuff to teach you here and now. There's a little verse in Colossians where Paul says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord and not for men, since you know that as your reward you will receive an inheritance from the Lord. So I said to him, Olly, just knuckle down, focus on this thing. Even though you don't know the full picture ahead, what you're doing now is going to play a part in what I'm going to want you to do in the future. So get on with making the most of the thing now. And some of us, particularly as we set out on our Unicrease, thinking, I don't know the long-term vision, but that doesn't matter. We don't need to. We need to focus on the step now and get the most of the step now and connect with the Lord, that personal journey with Jesus now, because it's somehow going to play a part in the future, even though we don't know exactly what the future is going to look like. But you'll regret it if you didn't do it now for that thing then. And I was actually working as a journalist and having to type every day and interview people. And now actually that's so helped me in my current work now. So something about calling. The Lord has a call on each of our lives. And connected with that actually, wherever we are, although the Lord calls us sort of where we are, but doesn't sort of leave us where we are. He wants us sort of to move forward and to grow out of that. And we'll come on to growth in a minute.
I just want to pick up on something Reuben said, because I think that's really important. I've spent a lot of time in my life thinking the next thing is going to be the next big thing, or I will be happy when, or I'm really going to get into doing the Lord's work once I'm ordained, once I'm in Plymouth, once I'm in Whitley. And there was a passage that really grounded me, and there were people that used to think like this a lot back in a city called Corinth, and Paul said to them, stay in the situation where I called you. It's keeping God's commands that count. And that's really interesting because it's not on anyone particularly, because when we talked about Whitley, so we're planting on an estate about 4 miles up the road, and it's, like all states, it's mixed. But a lot of people have come up to me and said, I'm really ready to step out of my comfort zone. And I get what they mean in many ways, so it's not anything against those people. And lots of people saying that. But as I've reflected on it and checked my own heart, because I've been thinking, I'm looking forward to stepping out my comfort zone, I feel the Lord saying to me, what exactly about following me right now are you finding really, really easy? What exactly about loving your neighbours yourself is particularly comfortable? What about blessing your enemies is easy? What about loving your wife as the church? Is that really, really easy? Is that really comfortable? And actually right here, right now, I think what you're saying, your call is here, your call is now, and you can go deeper into it. Is that the sort of thing?
So good. So something on calling, and calling can really only ever be worked out. It's a personal calling. The Lord has a personal call on each of our lives. But it can then only ultimately also be worked out in the context of the church, and God's displaying his manifold wisdom through that. The next thing is to do with sort of service. I don't really like the word service. It's sort of a countercultural sort of word. I almost feel it's sort of rather sort of negative-y word. I don't really like serving very much. But it's something inextricably linked to the Christian life. It's actually about service and serving other people. In fact, St. Paul says this in that passage, Ephesians 4:12. He says, it was he who gave, and he goes on to speak about different roles in the church, prophets and pastors and teachers and different things. But what's the point of them? To prepare God's people for works of service. That's the sort of context of it, so that God's manifold wisdom will be displayed. Share a little bit on service, guys, and what that means, and yeah.
Yeah, I think just tying into the call of wanting to follow Jesus, we can talk, I can talk about, I went through a phase of wanting to be closer to God and to serve Jesus and to know him more. I really felt that in my heart. I was praying that fervently, and I was living a life that was incompatible with that. And I hadn't made the connection between how I engaged with friends and family. And part of following Jesus is about doing the things he does and speaking the things he speaks and reaching out to the people he reaches out to, sitting with the people and sitting and eating with sinners, which is all of us. And so, okay, well, how did Jesus operate? He served. He poured himself out. And not because we deserved it, because there's nothing we can do, but because he loved us. And so to show his love, the two greatest commandments, love your neighbor as yourself, to show his love to other people, to recognize his love for you and to show it to other people is about pouring yourself out for them. Not because they deserve it, not because they've done anything, particularly at that point, but just because they're God's. And that radically has changed my life.
I love that, Reuben. I think one of the things that I've had since coming to St. Matt's, which has been a bit of a paradigm shift, and I don't know what church backgrounds people come from, anyone that's coming here, everything sort of points towards the front of the church. I mean, you sort of can't blame people, really. It's sort of how we set ourselves up today, for example. But we don't want, and this is why I've learned so much from Olly, we don't want people thinking this is where God's work happens, because this verse is saying the teachers and the pastors have been given to equip God's people for acts of service. So actually, perhaps, Olly, you can pack a little bit about your vision for the dream team and everything like that, because that's just the paradigm shift. I've been at churches, and it's a bit of a father knows best type environment, and everything falls on the vicar and everything like that. And that's not scalable. That's going to get you to a certain point, and everyone else misses out on the fun and having a part to play, but it's one of our sort of key principles, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I love that. So sometimes in the old sort of paradigm that I would have, everything would come to the vicar, and in a sense, so if someone was sick in the hospital, I'd go up to the hospital, and on one level, that's amazing, but on another level, as soon as I go up to the hospital, that's taking me out of doing other things, and then my time is only limited. But I love the vision that we're trying to cultivate here, in a sense where we're all on what we call our dream team. It's the macro word for us all, really, if we want to plug in, both to ensure that the church, physically, that we do Sundays and that sort of stuff, but wider out into our city. Let me tell you one little story. So a lady in our congregation had a facial tumor. She was a young mum, and she'd got this facial tumor. Her husband was away at work. She was in a nightmare situation, and she texted me to say, can you pray for me? So I texted her back, actually WhatsApp. I said, of course I can pray for you. And I said, would it be okay if I WhatsApp our medical healthcare fellowship? We have a medical healthcare fellowship. They're a small group in our church, and made up of lots of people up at Derriford who are filled with the Spirit of God and are working in their different areas. So I said, can I text them? She's like, absolutely. Any people praying would be amazing. I text them and I said, is anyone able to visit this lady? She's on X ward. It so happened that one of the ladies on that WhatsApp group, who is a brain surgeon, she WhatsApp backed and she said, absolutely, I've got a break coming up. I'd love to go and visit the lady. I got a message back an hour later from that lady saying, thank you so much for sending an angel. This girl had gone there, had prayed for her, had blessed her, and also given her a bit of medical wisdom on the condition she was facing. I can tell you, when I have a facial tumor, I don't want the vicar visiting me. I want the neurosurgeon, the brain surgeon visiting me, who can also pray over me. And that's the vision of the church being equipped and fired up. And also connected with that here, even this morning, for example, I mean, the church was rammed this morning. We've just moved to 7 groups on a Sunday morning for kids' church. We had, at the beginning, it was just literally Rob's kiddies. He's got 2 kiddies, I got 2 kiddies, and a few other kids. This morning, I think there's like 70 to 100 kids here every Sunday now. 7 groups. It takes about 25 to 30 helpers just to enable kids' church to happen in the mornings. I don't know what we're going to do over this term because it's just growing. But what I love is actually every person finding their sweet spot where they can dial in and engage and see themselves not only as doing that, but being part of this wider body that is having a massive impact on a greater level. Some of you might have heard the story of Sir Christopher Wren, who was the architect of St. Paul's Cathedral in London. And he came across 3 guys, 3 workmen, who were each chiseling 3 blocks of stone. And the first one, he said, "Mate, what are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I'm just chiseling out a block of stone to make an arch in a window." And he said, "Oh, great." He said to the second guy, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm making the west window of the cathedral." And then he said to the third guy, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm building a cathedral for the glory of God." He'd had that vision of what St. Paul was talking about. As each one of us serve in the areas and the sweet spots that we're gifted in, actually it's part of this wider, bigger, massive picture of the manifold wisdom of God coming through. So on the one level, when we're caring for, say, the creche children or these guys leading us in worship, actually they're connected to this massive, wider body that has this incredible impact across a city and a region, as each of us are intentionally serving. And on that note, sorry, I'll come into Lan in a second. Each one of us, I love it. Imagine if each one of us was intentionally on what we call our dream team this year. Just think for a moment, which is going to be my area? What are the gifts that God has given me? It's not about burning anyone out. It's about like, okay, one Sunday a month, I'm just going to own that welcome team. Like God is, often what happens is we get grumpy about an area in church and we miss out on the fact that actually God is giving us a ministry. We think, oh, it's not very friendly here. God's saying, I know it's not, and I've given you a gift of friendliness and welcome. Or someone say, oh, the coffee's rubbish in this place. No, it's the Lord saying, come on, let me do something about that. Let me play my part as the body of Christ in this, just to raise the level of coffee, or raise the level of welcome, or raise the level of worship, or raise the level of youth work, or kids work, or ministry into the city. What are we doing about the homeless? I don't know, but the Lord's giving you a gift to make a difference in that. And the things that we do in intentionally dialing in on, say, what we call our dream team, it's actually a springboard for being servant-hearted people in the rest of our life. So when I get home, I get excited about the worship and I feel the presence of the Lord. But actually, it's meant to equip me for the rest of the week to live that out, even when it gets hard. I look at the bin in our kitchen. Oh, goodness, will someone empty the bin in it? Olly, I'd love you to empty the bin. Really, me? That's my wife. No, Olly, you empty the bin. Being people of service, servant-hearted people, because the nature of the Christian life is a life of service in there. Anything else to add in any of that, boys? No.
Nailed it. You did nail it. I think the thing about just not being at the end of the line is really important. We had a guy this morning who's come to plant with us, and he got like 80 guys together or something up in a village about 10 miles up the road. And he's now moving. So basically what he's got 80 guys together, and once a week, once a month, whatever it is, they all just suggest something on this Facebook group and say, we're going canoeing, or we're going for a curry, or whatever. And guys are not great at getting together anyway, but he's got it happening. Like, it's brilliant, it's amazing. But what's even more about that impressive about that ministry for me is a few years down the line, he's now moving to do this plant with me, and he's left it to someone else to do. But he hasn't just done that as an afterthought. Hey guys, I'm off. Deal with that me. From the beginning, he was thinking, where's this going? How can I make myself dispensable here? And that's really important. So whether you're running a small group or you're working on the coffee, or actually whatever you're doing, whether it's in your job or whatever, just don't see yourself as the end of the line. Just be investing in somebody. Paul said to Timothy, what I've entrusted to you, entrust to somebody else. So just ask yourself that question in whatever I'm doing. If it's an important ministry, if it's an important part, and everything that we do actually is, because God has prepared in advance good works for us to do, just be thinking, who am I going to pass the baton on to? Because that's going to get scalable then. And now I'd love to be in a position in Whitley actually, where in 5 years' time, I'm free to say, I'm going to go and plant another church, or I'm free to stay and send someone else to go and plant the other church. Because there's 41 neighbourhoods, aren't there? 41 wards in Plymouth. And there are great churches around. But wouldn't it be great if there's a life-giving church in every single one?
Amen.
And we're only going to do that if people, all of us, take that sort of attitude where we say, I'm not going to make myself indispensable, create a vacancy for myself, but I'm going to make myself I'm going to write myself out the script like Johnny was talking about with the students. I've loved how Johnny's done that, by the way. That is absolutely brilliant. You go along on a student night, Johnny's almost free not to be there. And that's incredible.
Amen.
And everyone then gets to pray. They all know how to pray for each other. They all know how to chuck in a word. They all know how to pray for each other and have a little picture for people.
Amen.
You wouldn't do that if Johnny came in and just said, well, I'm the student pastor here, and everyone just looked at Johnny and went, well, that's great.
Amen. And it's a difficult paradigm actually to hold on to. It is difficult to hold on to that. I was thinking about our own physical bodies, and which is another picture that Paul uses of the church. And my big toe, which is quite a long way from my head because I'm quite tall, but actually my big toe is, the way the body works, my big toe, and I'm not a scientist here, but I know if I stub my big toe, I know it pretty quickly in my brain. So in a sense, my brain might as well be right next to my big toe because of the way my body is functioning and working. But it isn't. It's quite a long way from my head. But actually, because of the way the body functions and flows, my toe might as well be right here. And it says that Jesus is the head of the church. So actually, as everyone plays their role, actually, you're just as close to Jesus as anyone else might be, whether you're an eye or a big toe. It's right there when the church is functioning and flourishing well. Everyone in their sweet spot, everyone in their place, rather than everyone needing to be... Actually, it wouldn't be very friendly if you were all my best friends. You wouldn't really like that because I've got lots of problems. But like together, actually, as the church doing that, networking out just this amazing body of Christ over there. Do you want to add anything there?
Just
Reuben?
really, yeah, just a word for you, don't discount yourself in service. It's easy to say, oh, I'm a student actually, so this maybe doesn't apply to me. Maybe I'm going to be very busy, or I've got some issues, I've got some pain in my life, or I've got some health problems, and that discounts me. Maybe this doesn't mean me. And actually, God already knows all about that, and He has called you. And if you're a member of this church, or His church more precisely, if you love Jesus, then you are specifically called to serve this body of people. And that means that He's already equipped you, and it's important that you bring yourself to that as well.
Yeah. Let's move on now. The third thing. So the first thing was about calling, and the Lord has a call on each of our lives. The second thing was about service. And just do a little sort of check in your own head. Okay, what are going to be my sort of diarized touch points this term and year? Life has this incredible propensity to live us, but as Christians, we're called to live life, if that makes sense. And unless you make intentional things, it just charges on and you get spat out at the end of the year because you haven't made some intentional decisions over the year about how you want to live your life. And if you don't do that, it'll just live you, and you'll think, oh no, that's such a waste of a year. But as we come into land on this, then the final thing is about growth. As I mentioned earlier on, the Lord loves you and me. He gave His life for us where we were. And the Bible says, actually, we were dead in our transgressions. It doesn't get much worse than that. You were dead. And the Lord found us there and brought us back to life. But it doesn't leave us in a sort of a rotting context. Actually, He begins to grow us and to mature us. And St. Paul says here in 4:15, he says, we will in all things grow up into Him who is the head, that is Christ. The Christian life should be a growing life. In fact, I think it's in the Psalms, it says that the path of the righteous, i.e. those who know the Lord and who the Lord knows, the path of the righteous is like the first gleam of dawn, shining ever brighter till the full light of day. It doesn't mean necessarily that things will get easier. In fact, often they get harder as you go down the Christian life because the Lord is growing us and maturing us and deepening us. But it should be getting brighter in a sense. There should be a sense of a more excitement about the Lord as He leads us on. Share a little bit about growth, guys, and Christian growth and how we find the context of growth and what that looks like.
All right, then. Just encourage you with this to read through, just been reading through recently John 15, and it's just so brilliant. It's all about Jesus saying He's the vine and the Father is the vine grower, and it's just a metaphor of how being rooted in and growing out of your relationship with Jesus, you produce great fruit, and that's a glory to the Father. And that's what we want to do. We want to be fruitful, and we want to reach the nation. Unfortunately, it also says that to grow good fruit, you've got to be pruned, which is a little bit uncomfortable. And so just pushing through that and being willing for the Lord to do the work in your life. And there's a mystery, and you'll know this if you've shared testimony with each other and you've got personal with each other, that actually the times that people go, wow, I really grew massively, was a time when things were actually a bit difficult and maybe painful, and you had to call on the Lord, and you really were vulnerable in front of God and said, okay, I literally can't do anything myself. And that would be part of my story of having had a crushing bereavement where I was on my last legs. And I'd just fallen in front of the Lord and saying, okay, help, can't do this. And it was hideous. I'm not saying that I want to go straight back to it, Lord, but I will say that my faith and the depth of my relationship with Jesus has changed exponentially as a result of that vulnerability to God.
Yeah. One of the things I want to add in that, so we have this sort of, I was speaking about sort of our dream team, and sort of service is just part of what it is to be a Christian and working out, because we'll grow in that. But connected to that is what we call our small groups. Now, I don't really like the phrase small groups, because suddenly we get all institutional and all churchy, and we think, I don't know, do you want to do small groups? But actually what we're talking about in small groups is one has to get into an environment with people where you actually end up rubbing each other up the wrong way, because that's where real growth is. I know in my own family, when the door is closed, we have loads of great times, things like that, but also we have challenging times too. But it's often in those challenging moments we either walk away or we grow and deepen as we press through those things. It's actually part of like being in this small group environment. And for each one of you, just think this term, like what's going to be the small group that I'm going to be part of? Maybe it'll be part of Johnny's student small group nights. And because initially we have the great sheen and it's all exciting and everything like that, but even amazing chocolate muffins that we have here, you'll get bored of them over time. In fact, it's fascinating what happens. You have a chocolate muffin. You've probably never been to a church where you have a chocolate muffin. It's like, wow, they've got muffins in this place. This is amazing. Week 2, you're like, I'm not really sure about that muffin anymore. Week 3, you're like, can't I get some different muffins? Like the music, the muffins, it'll never do it ultimately. You'll always just be chasing the next hit. When actually the purpose of it is to create environments where we then really begin to dial in together, commit to one another, because actually that's really where the good stuff starts to happen. In fact, Rob and I had a little encounter, and when you're planting a church, it is exciting. It's sort of breakneck speed, all hands on deck. I used to say to my wife, all hands to the pump, and she said, no, that's when the thing is sinking. It's all hands on deck. So we were all hands to the pump and all hands on deck. And I remember one day I don't know how long ago it was, maybe a year ago, I don't know. Anyway, Rob had come into the office in the morning, and he had an idea about something. I can't remember what it was. He wasn't asking my opinion, but I just plowed on in. And as you know, even this evening, I talk quite a lot. And I just talked, and Robbie said, can I just pause you there? He said, if you're just going to stand and talk at me, I'm out. And he literally walked out the room. I was dumbfounded. But actually, I was convicted too. I was like, yeah. Hadn't stopped to actually listen to the guy. He wasn't asking for my opinion. And I thought, actually, then it was a make or break moment there. Do we both go our separate ways and ignore each other and that's it? Or do we do what the Christian life is really meant to be, where we come together? And I go to him and say, Robbie, I'm so sorry. And for him to say, no, that's okay. Maybe I shouldn't have just charged out. And then we start to get on some really good stuff, some relational things.
That's key. You and I sort of, it's quite easy not to do that. I think if we understand what church is, it is a commitment. Now, in one sense, I'm committed because I'm the curate and you're committed because you're vicar, so it's harder to walk away. But it would be sad if we didn't do it. I don't think we did it because we knew that we just had to work with each other and we have to sort it out. We did it because we're brothers. And I think that's what I'd love you all to do. I think that we live in a culture where it's very easy to move on, unfriend, on. Who's learned anything? Who's changed? I think about Jesus. He says, how many times then shall I forgive my brother? 7? 7's a lot. We're talking about one encounter. 7? He goes 7 times 7 or 7 times 77, depends which translation you look at. And you just think, okay, so whose benefit is that for? Is that for their benefit or for mine? To understand what grace is, to grow. And we live in a culture where it's very easy to move on. We live in a culture where we go from relationship to relationship, whether they be romantic or friendships, and we actually just take the same person, as in ourselves, to the next relationship and expect it to be different in the next place. And the way that we deal with it is try and find someone that we're more compatible with. And there is something in that. Like when you choose a church, find a church that you fit in with. Like if you're up for road, something like that, and bells and smells, that's great, but we don't do that here. So just work that out and go, okay, so I'm just incompatible. But when you're looking for a girlfriend, when you're looking for a friend, there's a certain amount of compatibility, but compatibility is not a static thing. When I met my wife, Jess, I thought we were really, really compatible, and we were. We checked each other out as much as we could. We got to know each other. We chatted and everything like that. And I thought she was fit and all that. It's great. But it's amazing how quickly you become uncompatible, particularly in your first year of marriage. So what do? Well, the good thing is marriage is a commitment. So you go, well, we're in this. So you grow and you change. So actually, compatibility is a fluid thing between two people, hopefully, that are both committed to change. But if both of you are saying, well, I'm not changing, then the marriage isn't going to flourish. And actually, using the illustration of marriage, in the next chapter, Jesus says, I'm not talking about marriage, I'm talking about me and my church. And if we just bounce from church to church, or small group to small group, or we just ignore the person we don't get on with because it's quite a big church, without giving them the grace and the opportunity to go, oh, that got my nerves a little bit, or I might have been a bit sensitive, but I heard this. Can we just have a little chat and a little pray? You're not going to grow. And there's so much at stake, because Jesus says, what I'm doing is preparing a beautiful bride for eternity. And church is actually the place to get ready for that. It's not the kingdom of God, but it's getting us ready for it, and it's bringing it.
And on the back of that, I really want to encourage us, if you're thinking about making St. Matt's your home, or it is your home already, I really want to create an environment where you don't feel as if you're walking on eggshells when you're having encounters with people. We don't want to go around the place, having lots of bust-ups with people, but actually we want to create an environment. So in our household at home, my wife and I know that ultimately we're for each other. We fall out from time to time, but actually there's no issue that's too difficult to address. We don't want to feel as if we're walking on eggshells. Of course, you have to pick your timing from time to time. 11 o'clock at night isn't the moment to just plow in on this issue that I might have with my wife or that she might have with me. But we want to create an environment where we want to work through this stuff. And not only I don't know when I can't remember when we had that encounter, but I hope we did, and I'm sure we might have done, but I know I do this with my wife, is actually not only do we have these painful and difficult and challenging conversations, but also we draw God into that. I know my wife and I, when we have what I call these ding-dongs, these difficulties, actually we then say, I'm sorry, and I'm so, and then we invite the Lord. We hold out and we say, come on, Lord, please, we need to grow. We want to become more like Christ. We want to become more loving. Help us, help me. And then we begin to see that growth. And there's nothing like it, actually. When you begin to really get onto some of the good stuff, you begin to experience God growing you and maturing you as we step out in these things. Anything else, Reuben, as we come into land?
No.
Let's just go back to the very first verses. I urge you then to live a life worthy of the calling that you've received. Why does he say urge you? Why does he end the letter to the Ephesians about saying our fight is not against flesh and blood, but against the spiritual authorities? Because it's not easy. And whether it's about the way you're living your life, whether it's struggling with drinking or living the holy life, or whether it's staying in the church, or whether it's serving, or whether it's you want to go and plant or do something like that, at every stage, there will be a little door beside you saying, quick exit. There will be. It's so easy to just take a quick exit and tell the guy to jog on and then just go on the other way, or I'm pulling out this church plant. There have been plenty of times when I've thought of doing that, and there'll be plenty of times here when Olly just goes, oh, well, it's too grand a vision. Let's just bring it back a little bit. There'll be times here where you go 6 months into your course, I just hate uni and things like that. And there'll just be a little exit straight away. Just the enemy will go, here you go. But Jesus says, fix your eyes on me. He says, stick on the narrow path. And every time you look to the side of you, you'll see it, and there'll be temptation everywhere. There'll always be someone who wants to go down to the pub and just waiting to give you that way out. But there will always be Jesus at the end just saying, no, this is when it's about to get exciting. This is when we're going to take growth. So don't take that side door. Do fight. And Paul ends his letter saying that. All of his letters, actually, particularly as when he ended his life, writing to Timothy, he said, I've fought the good fight. He says, run like an athlete. Athletes aren't just looking at the pits on the side of they'll end up in the pits, but they're just looking at the flag. And that's what you need to do. It's not going to be easy, but it is with Jesus. Yeah. So it's awesome. Yeah. But just beware that the little exit sign's always there. Just take that little by road and just, we're off.
That's so good. And I think all of us, like we're sort of ordained clergy in a sense, but I'm not sitting on this stage like you guys. We're not sitting here because I'm interested in religion or interested in a career in Christianity. It's because I know that otherwise my life could have gone off on many unhelpful trajectories. And I've known that for me sort of personally, this sort of Christian walk that I've been on for the last throughout my life really, but particularly the last 18 years, there's been no other way. And it's been very hard at certain moments. But I think it's in Jeremiah where it says, you'll hear this voice saying, don't turn to the left, don't don't turn to the right, but keep your eyes sort of fixed ahead. Keep walking on that straight line. And as I've sort of responded to God's call and hearing that and following that and pursuing that, as we've tried to live a life of service, even though it's hard serving others, it's hard opening up our homes, but I know that our lives, for me and for my wife and for our family, become better as we do that. And I know that we've grown. I'm growing as a person. I'm very much a work in progress, like each of these characters are too. But I know that I'm a little bit more like Christ than I was last year, and hopefully the year before and the year before that. I've got a long way to go, and actually we'll never finish until we see the Lord face to face. But I'm committed to that path, to that journey, and we can only do it together in this context of the church family. Would you like to stand? Let's stand together.